The air inside the mall was always too cold. A specific kind of chilled sterility that seemed designed to keep people moving rather than lingering. And I stood there near the entrance of the flagship store, feeling the chill seep through the thin fabric of my cardigan. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that usually promised a slow, leisurely rhythm. But my mind was occupied with the quiet hum of anxiety that often accompanies trying to do something simple in a world that feels overly complicated. I was 39 years old enough to know better than to care about the opinions of strangers, yet young enough to still feel the sting of judgment when it was delivered with a sneer. I had come here to buy a gift, something tangible and thoughtful for my husband, Julian, whose birthday was approaching in a few days. It wasn't about the cost of the item, because we could have bought the entire store if we wanted to, but about the sentiment of choosing something myself, without his assistant, without his credit card team, without the buffer of wealth that usually surrounded us like a protective glass wall. I wanted to feel normal, just for an hour. I wanted to feel like Lydia, the woman who taught herself to garden and loved the smell of old books, not Lydia, the wife of the billionaire who owned the very building I was standing in. I had dressed down for this purpose, wearing jeans that were comfortable but faded, a simple white tee, and the cardigan I had knitted myself during a winter when we had less money and more time. I thought I looked presentable, grounded, but as I stepped toward the display of leather goods, I realized that in this temple of commerce, grounded looked like poor and simple looked like irrelevant. The sales associate was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with a polished ponytail and a name tag that gleamed under the track lighting. She was standing behind the counter, arranging wallets with a precision that suggested she cared deeply about the order of things, and when I approached, she didn't look up immediately. I waited, giving her a moment to finish her task, because I believe in respecting people's workflow, but when she finally lifted her eyes, there was a flicker of assessment that happened so quickly I almost missed it. It was a calculation, a rapid scanning of my shoes, my bag, the lack of jewelry on my fingers, and the conclusion she drew was visible in the slight tightening of her smile. She didn't greet me with the warmth reserved for potential buyers. She greeted me with the polite dismissal reserved for window shoppers. I asked about a specific briefcase, one I knew Julian would like because it was understated and durable, and she told me that it was part of a limited collection that was currently being held for VIP clients. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but the underlying message was clear. This isn't for you. I didn't react angrily. I have learned over the years that anger is often a waste of energy, a spilling of emotion that yields no return. Instead, I asked if there was a way to see it, perhaps just to look, and she sighed, a small exhalation of impatience that felt heavier than it should have. She told me that the store policy was to minimize handling of those items to prevent wear, and she gestured vaguely toward a section of the store that was clearly marked for accessories under $50. It was a subtle redirection, a gentle herding toward the cheaper goods, and while it wasn't a shout or a scene, it was a clear statement about where she thought I belonged in the hierarchy of her world. I stood there for a moment, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks, not because I was ashamed of my clothes, but because I was disappointed in the assumption. I have always believed that dignity is internal, that it comes from how you carry yourself rather than what you wear. But there are moments when the external world forces you to confront the labels it tries to paste on you. I told her that I understood, that I would just look around, and I turned away to walk toward the back of the store, hoping to find a different associate who might be less focused on my appearance and more focused on service. But as I moved through the aisles, I could feel her eyes on me, a surveillance that made me feel like a potential theft rather than a customer. It is a strange feeling to be invisible and hypervisible at the same time, invisible as a person with value but hypervisible as a potential problem. I stopped near a display of scarves, running my fingers over the silk, thinking about how Julian loved the texture of soft things despite his hard exterior in business, and I tried to push the interaction out of my mind. I told myself it didn't matter, that this woman didn't know me, that her opinion was a statistic of no consequence. But the seed of insecurity had been planted, not about my worth, but about the distance between the life I lived with Julian and the life I remembered before him. Before Julian, I was a project manager for a nonprofit. I drove a 10-year-old sedan, and I budgeted for groceries. Now, I lived in a house with a staff, I had drivers, and my presence in a place like this was supposed to be guaranteed by my last name. Yet here I was, standing in a store owned by my husband's conglomerate, being treated like a trespasser. The irony was not lost on me, and I might have laughed if the situation wasn't so quietly painful. I was considering leaving, deciding that the gift wasn't worth the friction, when the atmosphere in the store shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure, the way the air moves before a storm. The sales associate straightened up, her eyes widening slightly as she looked toward the entrance. I turned to see what had caught her attention, and there he was. Julian was walking through the doors, not with the entourage he usually had when he made official visits, but alone. He was wearing a dark suit, the kind that fits so perfectly it looks like it was painted on, and his expression was unreadable from where I stood. He wasn't supposed to be here. I knew his schedule. I knew he was in a board meeting downtown until late afternoon. And yet there he was, moving with a purpose that cut through the casual shoppers like a knife. He didn't look at the displays, he didn't look at the other customers, he looked straight at me. And then, his gaze shifted to the sales associate, and I saw the change in him. It was subtle, a hardening around the eyes, a set to his jaw that I knew well. It was the look he got when he perceived a threat, not to his business, but to his family. He walked toward us, his steps steady and unhurried, and the sales associate suddenly found something very interesting to do on her computer terminal, her posture shrinking slightly as he approached. When Julian reached me, he didn't ask me what was wrong. He knows me well enough to read the tension in my shoulders, the slight rigidity in my stance. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive, and turned to the associate. He didn't raise his voice. Julian never raises his voice. He doesn't have to. He simply stated his name, and the effect was instantaneous. The manager was summoned within seconds, appearing from the back office with a look of panic that suggested he knew exactly who Julian was and what his presence here implied. I stood there, feeling a complex mix of emotions swirling in my chest. On one hand, there was relief, the comfort of knowing that I was not alone, that someone was in my corner. On the other hand, there was a prickly sensation of embarrassment, not because of the insult I had received, but because of the way Julian was handling it. He wasn't just asking for an apology. He was dismantling the hierarchy of the store with a few calm sentences. He spoke about standards, about the brand's commitment to inclusivity, about the fact that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect regardless of their attire. He was right, absolutely right, but I watched him speak and I felt a distance opening up between us. He was fighting the battle for me, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be fought for in this way. I wanted to be heard, not defended. I wanted the woman behind the counter to see me, not just to see the power of my husband. The manager was apologizing profusely, offering me anything in the store, comping the item, promising disciplinary action, and Julian listened to it all with a cold nod. He turned to me then, his eyes softening as he asked if I wanted to stay or if we should leave. I looked at the briefcase, then at the sales associate who was now staring at the floor, and I made my choice. I told him I wanted to buy the item at full price with my own card. Julian hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but he nodded. He understood that this was important to me, that I needed to complete the transaction on my own terms to reclaim the dignity of the moment. We went to the counter, the silence between us heavy but not hostile, and I paid for the briefcase. The sales associate bagged it with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact, and I took the bag, looking her in the eye for a brief moment. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't need to. I simply said thank you, and I meant it because even in her error, she was a person doing a job, and I refused to let her mistake define my character. We walked out of the store, and the cold air of the mall hit us again, but this time it felt like a relief. Julian took the bag from me without asking, carrying it like it was made of glass, and we walked toward the exit where his car was waiting. The drive home was quiet. Julian drove himself, which was unusual, but I suspected he needed the control of the steering wheel, the physical act of navigation to ground himself after the confrontation. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the city blur past the windows, the skyscrapers giving way to the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood. The silence wasn't angry, but it was dense, filled with all the things we weren't saying. I thought about the way he had stepped in, the immediate instinct to protect, and I wondered if he saw me as someone who needed saving. I have spent years building a life where I am capable, where I handle crises, where I manage budgets and people and problems. But to him, perhaps, I was still the woman he found during a storm, the one who needed shelter. It is a common dynamic in relationships where there is a disparity in wealth or power. This subtle shift, where the partner with more resources assumes the role of the provider and protector, even when the other partner is fully grown and fully able. I loved Julian deeply, there was no question about that, but love does not immunize you against misunderstanding. It does not stop you from interpreting actions through the lens of your own insecurities. I looked at his hands on the wheel, the veins slightly prominent, the wedding band gleaming in the sunlight, and I felt an ache of affection mixed with frustration. I wanted to tell him that I didn't need him to fix the world for me, I just needed him to stand beside me while I fixed it myself. But I didn't say it. I waited. I have learned that speaking in the heat of the moment often leads to words that cannot be taken back, so I let the silence stretch, letting the momentum of the car carry us home. When we arrived at the house, the grandeur of it always felt a little overwhelming to me, even after 5 years of living there. It was a modern structure of glass and stone, perched on a hill overlooking the lake, beautiful but impersonal until we filled it with our lives. Julian parked the car in the garage, and we walked into the kitchen through the side entrance. The house was empty, the staff having the weekend off, which suited me fine. I wanted privacy. I wanted us to be alone, so that we could strip away the titles and the money, and just be two people who were trying to figure out why the air between them felt thick. Julian put the bag on the counter and turned to me, leaning against the marble island. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, the kind of tired that comes from worrying. He asked me if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, which was a half-truth. I was physically fine, but emotionally I was processing. He nodded, accepting the answer but not believing it because he knows me too well. He poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across the counter to me, a peace offering in liquid form. I took it, holding the cool glass in my hands, and I decided that this was the moment. This was the moment to stop guarding myself and to start seeking the truth. I told him that I appreciated what he did at the store. I told him that I knew he did it out of love, out of a desire to see me treated with the respect I deserved. But I also told him that it felt like he had taken over the situation, that he had made it about his power rather than my presence. I spoke slowly, choosing my words carefully, because I didn't want to accuse him, I wanted to explain myself. I told him that when he stepped in, I felt like a child who had been rescued, not a partner who had been supported. I saw his expression change, a flicker of pain crossing his face, but he didn't interrupt. He listened, his eyes fixed on mine, absorbing every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, looking down at the water in his glass. Then he looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was vulnerability. He told me that he didn't see a child when he looked at me. He told me that he saw the most capable woman he knew, the woman who held his world together when everything else was falling apart. He said that when he saw that woman being dismissed, being treated as less than, it triggered something primal in him. It wasn't about control, he said. It was about fear. This was the turn, the moment where the misunderstanding began to shatter. He admitted that he was afraid. Afraid that I was growing distant, afraid that the world outside our bubble was pulling me away, afraid that one day I would realize that life with him meant living in a goldfish bowl where everyone had an opinion about you. He said that when he saw the sales associate look at me with disdain, it confirmed his worst fear. That my choice to live simply was being interpreted as weakness, and that he was failing to protect me from the judgment of the world. He wasn't trying to dominate me. He was trying to shield me from the pain he knew was coming. He told me that he knows how much I value my independence, how much I hate being defined by his wealth, and that he struggles every day with knowing when to step in and when to step back. He said that at the mall, he panicked. He saw the hurt in my eyes, even if I hid it well, and his instinct was to erase the source of that hurt immediately, forcefully. He apologized, not for defending me, but for not asking me first how I wanted to be defended. He admitted that he treated the situation like a business transaction, a problem to be solved, rather than an emotional experience to be shared. Listening to him, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to soften. I had interpreted his actions as a lack of trust in my ability to handle myself, but he was explaining that it was actually a surplus of care, misdirected by his own anxieties. It was a revelation that changed the color of the entire afternoon. I realized that I had been so focused on maintaining my own autonomy that I had failed to see his vulnerability. I had assumed his power made him invulnerable, that he didn't have fears about our relationship, about whether I was truly happy. I had forgotten that behind the billionaire owner was just a man who loved his wife and was terrified of losing her to the very world he commanded. I took a sip of water, setting the glass down on the counter, and I reached out to take his hand. His skin was warm, his grip tight. I told him that I understood. I told him that I wasn't leaving, that I wasn't pulling away, and that the modest clothes and the solo shopping trips weren't signs of dissatisfaction, but ways for me to stay grounded so that I could be present with him. I explained that when I go out alone, it's not because I want to escape him, but because I want to bring myself back to him whole, not just as an extension of his empire. We stood there in the kitchen for a long time, holding hands, bridging the gap that the mall incident had created. It wasn't a magical fix. There were still things we needed to work on, boundaries we needed to negotiate, but the intent was clear. We were on the same side. The conflict hadn't been about the sales associate or the briefcase. It had been about communication. It had been about two people who loved each other trying to navigate the complexities of a life that looked perfect from the outside, but required constant maintenance on the inside. Julian squeezed my hand and told me that he would try to do better, to ask before he acted, to trust that I could handle the rough edges of the world. And I told him that I would try to do better too, to let him in when I was hurt, to not shut him out in the name of independence. We agreed that trust wasn't just about believing the other person wouldn't hurt you. It was about believing they were trying their best even when they stumbled. It was a mature realization, one that felt earned after years of togetherness. We moved from the kitchen to the living room, the sun beginning to set outside the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The light was golden, warm, transforming the cold, modern lines of the house into something cozy. We sat on the sofa, the briefcase sitting on the coffee table between us, a symbol of the day's journey. Julian asked me about the gift, why I had chosen that specific one, and I told him the story of why I thought it suited him. We talked about other things too, about the garden I was planning for the spring, about the charity board meeting I had next week, about the book he was reading. The conversation flowed easily now, the tension dissipated, replaced by the comfortable rhythm of us. I realized that this was what I wanted. Not the defense, not the grand gestures, but this. The quiet intimacy of being known. The knowledge that we could have a conflict, a real misunderstanding, and come out of it closer than before. It is easy to love someone when everything is perfect, but love is truly tested in the moments of friction, in the way you repair the bond after it has been strained. As the evening deepened, we ordered dinner, something simple from a local place, and ate at the dining table instead of the formal setting we rarely used. We talked about the sales associate, not with anger, but with perspective. Julian mentioned that he wouldn't fire her, that he had instructed the manager to provide additional training on customer service instead. He said that punishing her wouldn't change the culture, but educating her might. I appreciated that. It showed me that his defense wasn't about vengeance, it was about improvement. It aligned with my own values, and seeing that alignment made me feel even more secure in us. I realized that sometimes I project my own fears onto his actions, assuming he wants to wield power when he actually wants to wield influence for good. It was a reminder that I need to check my assumptions, just as he needs to check his instincts. We are both learning, every day, how to be better partners. After dinner, we walked out onto the terrace, the air cool and crisp, the lake shimmering under the moonlight. It was peaceful here, away from the noise of the city, away from the judgment of the mall. Julian put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close, and I rested my head against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. I thought about the title of the story people might tell if they knew what happened today. The poor lady insulted at the mall. It sounded like a tabloid headline, something sensational and shallow. But the real story wasn't about the insult. It wasn't about the money or the status. The real story was about the conversation in the kitchen. It was about the choice to seek clarity over anger. It was about the decision to listen rather than react. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for that. In a world that encourages us to be quick to offend and quick to defend, we had chosen to be slow, to be thoughtful, to be kind to each other. I thought about the women who might hear this story, women my age who are navigating their own relationships, their own complexities of wealth and identity, or perhaps just the daily grind of being misunderstood. I wanted them to know that it is okay to feel hurt. It is okay to feel frustrated. But the resolution doesn't come from winning the argument. It comes from understanding the heart behind the action. I looked up at Julian, and he was looking out at the water, his profile sharp against the night sky. He sensed me looking and turned down, smiling softly. It was a smile that held all the history of us, the early days when we had nothing but time, the middle days when we built everything, and now, these days where we are learning how to keep it all without losing ourselves. I smiled back, and in that exchange the day was fully resolved. The insult at the mall was a speck of dust, brushed away by the warmth of this moment. We went back inside, locking the doors against the night, securing our own little world. I went to the bedroom to change, and Julian went to his study to check some emails, a habit he couldn't break. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection. I saw the lines around my eyes, the signs of aging that I used to worry about but now accepted as maps of where I had been. I saw a woman who was loved, not for what she wore or what she owned, but for who she was. I took off the cardigan, the one I had knitted, and hung it up. I would wear it again. I would wear it proudly. It wasn't a symbol of poverty. It was a symbol of my creativity, my history, myself. I wouldn't hide it to fit into a store's expectation, and I wouldn't hide it to fit into Julian's world. I would be myself, and I trusted that Julian would love that woman, even if he sometimes stumbled in showing it. Later, when I climbed into bed, Julian came in shortly after. He turned off the lights, sliding under the covers beside me. The room was dark, but I could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. He reached out in the dark, finding my hand, and laced his fingers through mine. We didn't need to say anything more. The words had been said in the kitchen, and now silence was enough. I lay there, listening to the house settle, the wind outside rustling the trees. I thought about the evidence of our love. It wasn't in the briefcase, or the mall, or the bank accounts. It was in the willingness to have the hard conversation. It was in the ability to say, I was scared, and here I understand. It was in the trust that we could navigate the misunderstandings without breaking the bond. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a deep, resonant calm that settled into my bones. This was the happiness I sought, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of resolution. The next morning, the sun woke me early, streaming through the curtains. I woke up before Julian, which was rare, and I watched him sleep for a moment. He looked younger when he slept, the worries of the boardroom faded from his face. I got up quietly and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was silent, filled with the smell of brewing beans. I stood by the window, watching the mist rise off the lake, thinking about the day ahead. There would be more challenges, more moments where the world would try to label us, to define us by our assets or our appearances. But I knew now that we had a protocol. We had a way of returning to each other. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Julian walking in, rubbing his eyes, wearing his robe. He walked straight to me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He didn't ask about the night, he knew. He just held me, and I leaned back into him. We drank our coffee together at the counter, the briefcase still sitting there, waiting to be wrapped. I told him I would wrap it later, after I finished my work in the garden. He nodded, saying he would be home early tonight. No big events, no galas, just home. It was a small promise, but it meant everything. It meant that he was prioritizing us, prioritizing the quiet over the noise. I finished my coffee and stood up, ready to start the day. I felt light, unburdened. The insult at the mall felt like a dream now, distant and insignificant. What remained was the truth of us. I walked over to Julian and kissed him on the cheek, a simple gesture of affection. He caught my hand before I could pull away and kissed my palm. It was a gesture of reverence, of acknowledgement. I smiled and walked toward the garden door, stepping out into the cool morning air. The garden was my sanctuary, the place where I could get my hands dirty and watch things grow. It was a metaphor for our relationship, I realized. You have to tend to it, pull the weeds, water the roots, protect it from the frost. Sometimes you think a plant is dead, but with care, it blooms again. I picked up my trowel and knelt in the soil, feeling the earth beneath my fingers. It was real, tangible, grounding. I thought about the sales associate again, and I hoped she was okay. I hoped she learned from the experience, not that she was fired, but that she understood the impact of her assumptions. I wished her well, genuinely. Holding on to resentment was too heavy a load to carry into a new day. I chose to let it go, to focus on the growth in front of me. As I worked, I thought about the narrative of my life. For a long time, I felt like a supporting character in Julian's story, the wife who stood by the powerful man. But yesterday reminded me that I am the protagonist of my own life. I make the choices. I choose to dress simply. I choose to shop alone. I choose to speak up when I feel diminished. And I choose to love Julian, not despite his wealth, but alongside it, navigating the complexities with eyes wide open. I am not a poor lady. I am not a rich lady. I am Lydia. And that is enough. The sun climbed higher, warming my back, and I continued to work, digging into the earth, planting seeds for the future. I knew that whatever came next, whatever misunderstandings or challenges arose, we would face them with intelligence and heart. We would choose clarity over anger. We would choose trust over fear. And that, more than any defense at a mall, was the true foundation of our happiness. The day moved on, hours passing in the rhythm of gardening and housework. Julian left for a short meeting but returned by lunch, bringing sandwiches from the place I liked. We ate on the terrace, talking about nothing and everything. The ease between us was restored, but it was a stronger ease now, tempered by the honesty of the night before. It wasn't the fragile peace of avoiding topics. It was the robust peace of having survived them. I looked at him across the table, noticing the way the sunlight caught the gray in his hair, a distinction he had earned over years of building his empire. I felt a surge of pride, not for his money but for his character. He had listened. He had changed. He had chosen us. In the afternoon, I wrapped the briefcase. I chose simple brown paper, tied with twine, no fancy bows. It was perfect. I left it on the desk where he would find it. I didn't wait for his reaction. I knew it would be good. I went to the living room and picked up a book, settling into the chair by the window. The house was quiet, filled with the sense of safety that comes from knowing you are understood. I read for a while, losing myself in the story, but my mind kept drifting back to the theme of resolution. How often do we let small moments become big rifts because we are too proud to ask for clarification? How often do we assume malice when there is only fear? I hope that my story, in some small way, could remind others to pause, to breathe, to ask the question before making the statement. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep violet, signaling the end of the day. Julian came into the living room, holding the wrapped briefcase. He looked at me, his eyes shining. He didn't say thank you immediately. He sat down beside me and put the box on his lap. He told me that it was the best gift he had ever received, not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. It represented my thoughtfulness, my independence, my love. He said he would use it every day, and every time he opened it, he would remember that he is loved for himself, not for what he owns. It was a beautiful sentiment, and I felt my heart swell. We sat there as the room darkened, not turning on the lights, just existing in the twilight together. I thought about the journey of the last 24 hours, from the cold air of the mall to the warmth of this room, from the sting of judgment to the comfort of acceptance. It was a reminder that life is not a straight line. It is a series of moments, some sharp, some soft, and our job is to weave them into a tapestry that makes sense. We had woven this thread successfully. We had taken a moment of potential division and turned it into a moment of connection. I felt ready for whatever came next. I felt strong. I felt loved. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that we were going to be okay. Not because we were perfect, but because we were willing to be real. The night settled in fully, the stars appearing above the lake. We ordered dinner again, staying in, enjoying the solitude. I thought about the future, about the years ahead. There would be more malls, more judgments, more misunderstandings, but we had the tools now. We had the language of trust. We had the commitment to clarity. I looked at Julian, who was laughing at something on his phone, a rare, unguarded sound. I smiled. This was the victory. Not the defense at the mall, but the laughter in the living room. The ability to be happy, truly happy, in the quiet spaces. I raised my glass of water to him, a silent toast. He looked up, caught the gesture, and raised his glass back. We didn't need words. The understanding was complete. As I lay in bed that night, drifting toward sleep, I thought about the title of the story again. Poor lady was insulted at the mall. It was a headline that belonged to a different world, a world of surfaces. My world was deeper. My world was about the woman who chose clarity. The woman who chose love. The woman who knew that her worth was not determined by a sales associate or a bank account, but by her own integrity and the quality of her relationships. I closed my eyes, feeling the soft sheets against my skin, the warmth of Julian beside me. I was safe. I was seen. I was whole. And that was the only resolution that mattered. The sleep that came was deep and dreamless. The sleep of a mind at peace, ready to wake up and start again, grounded in truth, surrounded by love.